Alright, YouTube, let's dive into probably the most pressing and important topic. Why do people go to Argentina? Of course, it's about childbirth, getting a passport, documents, and everything related to these topics. Svetlana and I have been working together for quite a while now, and from what I know about Argentina, I'd say Svetlana is probably the best expert. I'm not afraid to say it. I've seen all the competitors, I watch them and I think, no one can explain in such detail and depth what's really going on here like she can. That's that. But let's get to know each other a bit. I want you to tell us how you ended up in Argentina, why you came here, what your purpose was, how many years ago, and so on.
Well, we came to Argentina at the beginning of 2022. We, probably like many others who come here, originally came to have our first child. And it just so happened that we ended up staying here. We stayed so long that now it's our 4th year living in Argentina. During this time, we had our second child here as well. So, we came to have one child, but ended up as happy parents of 2 kids close in age, you could say.
Interesting. Why didn't you decide to have your second child in another country?
Well, honestly, we never even considered having our second child in any country other than Argentina. Because, well, naturally, our first child is Argentinian. If we're talking about any other country specifically within Latin America, well, we didn't consider it because Argentina is the best country for giving birth if we're talking about certain opportunities for the child, right? I mean, Argentinian citizenship gives you visa-free entry to Europe, the ability to get a 10-year US visa, and a lot of other perks as well. That's if, again, we're comparing with other Latin American countries. Plus, we've already settled here, we've decided that we're living here. So it was actually a bit strange, in general, to even discuss the possibility of giving birth in some other country.
Tell me, how many families have you already assisted here? And what exactly do you help with? So, how does the whole process work?
Well, I guess here I should rewind a bit and talk about how this whole journey started and how I actually came to do this. Originally, when we first came here, I had my first child, and about 2 months after giving birth for the first time, I actually started working in real estate. I had never done it before, but I decided to give it a try here in Argentina. Basically, I was helping people who were coming here to find a place to live, communicate with the owner or the agent, go see the place, show it to them, record a video if there was a remote search, and help them move in. So, yeah, I basically handled all the processes. And everything started to change around the fall of 2022 when a huge wave of pregnant women started coming here. That wave continued, from September to December 2022 and throughout all of 2023. Then,
There you are, holding your baby, thinking, maybe I should do it too.
well, Argentina, in my opinion, motherhood is easy in Argentina because society totally supports it. I mean, there's no vibe here that if you have a baby, you have to stay home so the child doesn't bother anyone or anything like that. There's just nothing like that here. And in my opinion, that's really cool because it really makes things easier for you. It lowers your stress and anxiety levels. Because when you have a child, it's only logical that your anxiety level, one way or another, goes up. Yeah, this kind of smooths things out. You feel comfortable here, so I had no problems doing this with a child. When he was sleeping, I could do something on my phone, communicate with clients, I could even show an apartment or go check it out and record a video. So there really weren't any problems with that at all. Everyone here treated it completely normally and reasonably. Yeah. So, up until about 8 months, I guess, with my first child, I could work absolutely calmly, and honestly, it didn't bother me at all.
Do you use nannies here? Do you use nanny services or?
Well, not anymore, because now my oldest is 3 years and 3 months, and the youngest is 2 years and 3 months, and now they go to daycare. Yeah, but before that, when daycare wasn't available to us yet because of the kids' ages, yes, we did use a nanny. We had a Russian-speaking nanny. She was Argentinian. Yeah, so we have experience in this area too.
Did you go through a lot of candidates? I know that people usually consider quite a lot of candidates.
Our first nanny was Russian speaking. She worked with us for about 6 months. Then we had an Argentinian nanny. She worked with us for a long time, I think about a year and a half. Yeah. And after that, we had an Argentinian nanny for our second daughter. Yeah. Well, maybe she worked with us for about 6 months, and then we got access to something like kindergarten.
Wait,
Because, well, for me, kindergarten still seems like a more reliable option. Yeah. Yeah, because, well, I guess it's more relevant for parents who work. Yeah, because kindergarten is an institution that's always open.
the kindergarten is local?
My kids go to two kindergartens, meaning they spend half the day in a Spanish one and half the day in a Russian one. At first, we started with the Spanish kindergarten for half a day, and then, about a year later, we added the Russian kindergarten for the other half of the day. The main reason was that my older child started speaking Spanish first, not Russian. Yeah, well, that's because we live in this environment. Because he was born here, we live in this environment. And on top of that, he had an Argentinian nanny. Yeah, and so I think that definitely played a role. So at some point, it became clear that he needed a Russian-speaking environment where he could practice Russian. And I have to say, it worked. Yeah, because when he started speaking only Spanish, we got a bit concerned. Well, at first we waited, then we got concerned, read up on it, gathered a lot of different information, and found out that parents actually aren't a motivation for kids to speak. In other words, to speak their parents' language.
Yeah, I really like that, because a lot of people worry that their kids won't start speaking the language of the country. But actually, what you should be worried about is whether they'll speak your language. Because kids definitely won't have any trouble adapting.
I don't know how things will go. I mean, we'll see how it goes at school, because obviously the school will be, well, Argentinian, right? So it'll be Spanish speaking, yeah, but for now, they speak both languages. So they speak Russian when, well, with us, of course, and when they go to the Russian kindergarten, and they speak Spanish when they go to the Spanish kindergarten. Yeah, so they're starting to switch between the two. What I see, this is just my own observation, is that they don't realize these are two different languages. So they just understand that there are people they speak one language with, because those people, for example, don't understand Russian. And there are people they speak Russian with, like? Because, well, that's just how they talk. Yeah, and that's probably unique and, yeah, kind of amazing for bilingual kids.
I'm curious, when you came here, what kind of childbirth options did you consider? I know that here it was very common, at least a couple of years ago. These are state-funded births, free of charge. So, as far as I know, here everyone can give birth for free. You don't have to pay anything. But many Russians, since they are, well, foreigners, just from a logical and common sense perspective, don't want to, so to speak, take advantage of another country's resources.
Yes, I'll answer that question now. Let me just go back to the story for a moment, to when I was working, dealing with real estate. Everything started to change right around the fall of 2022. A large flow of people started coming here, and of course, first and foremost, it was pregnant women. There was truly an anomaly for the market, because local Argentine agents at some point genuinely became concerned that there wouldn't be enough apartments. There just physically wouldn't be enough of them. That's how many people there were.
Yeah, I got caught up in that boom too.
That's why they tried to get involved in childbirth with me, considering I work with apartments, because there's a small nuance there. At that time, I was already pregnant for the second time, and naturally, there were a lot of conversations about how we gave birth here, how we live here, how everything is set up, and so on. So my path was that at first, I just provided some consultations. Then we started handling documents, and after that, it grew into some kind of full-fledged support. Well, yeah, we'll talk about that more later, right? Sort of separately. Yeah, up to the kind of support, in the form it exists now. So, going back to the question about, when we came here, how did we give birth, right? So there were probably free healthcare, paid childbirth, like in a private hospital, and yeah, I guess there were maternity insurances. I didn't know anything about that, to be honest, because we arrived, well, pretty much at the last minute, you know. So, about a month or a month and a half before giving birth, I was already like 35 weeks along. So that was probably, well, the final term when the airline would still let me on the flight. Yeah. So we ended up giving birth in a private hospital. We gave birth at SUIS. That's what it's called. But here, among the Russian-speaking community, people call it SWIS. Yeah. So we gave birth there, and we chose a doctor from that hospital.
That's interesting, by the way. Going back to the 35th week, the airlines, and so on. About a year and a half ago, there were rumors going around that Russian speakers were being turned away or not allowed into the country, those who arrived visibly pregnant, and so on. Yeah, but in reality, that's all just not true. Everyone was let in. I can't recall a single case where someone was actually turned back or deported to Russia or anywhere else. But I think it's worth talking about this, because since those rumors were circulating, people probably still have some questions in their minds, and it's probably a good idea to dispel these myths.
Well, if we're talking about entry rules, people are flying in, specifically, yes, to Argentina, and there are certain requirements they have to meet in order to enter Argentina. In other words, these are the entry requirements set by Argentina from their side. If people meet these entry requirements, then there's no reason, of course, for them not to pass customs or immigration control. So, accordingly, people need to have tickets, and they need to have a visa if they don't have a visa-free period, for example, like most CIS countries do. People must definitely have return tickets. An important point here is probably that the return tickets must be either to the country of residence, which is the country of citizenship,
Or to any other country.
no, or to the country where, well, for example, if they don't live in Russia, say, but live in another country, then they must have a residence permit for that country in order to be able to buy a return ticket there. So, it's about the fact that the return ticket can be to neighboring countries like Brazil, Uruguay, and so on. Well, I don't recommend any of my couples who fly here to use this approach. Yeah, because that's not your country of residence, and questions may arise. Right. And of course, you need to have a housing reservation. That is, you need to show that you have a place to stay here. Yeah. And you must have medical insurance for the duration of your trip.
Interesting. Well, I've flown in and out of here several times already, and honestly, I've never had any problems at the border. But of course, it's probably still best to follow the recommendations regarding the required documents. But they didn't even ask me about accommodation or the purpose of my stay. And even after overstaying my legal period here, I flew out to the Dominican Republic and came back without any questions at all. They asked, "What is the purpose of your visit?" I said, "Tourism." "Have you lived here?" I said, "Yes, I have." That's it, no more questions. So, usually Argentinians are very lenient both when you leave and when you enter the country. So I think this isn't the main issue you should be worried about. Alright, let's move on to the types that are common right now. So if we're talking about public, private, and giving birth with insurance.
Yes, at one time giving birth with insurance was popular, but the important point here, I guess, is that I had my second child with insurance, but I got that insurance before I became pregnant. So, after our first child was born, we just got health insurance for all our family members, me, my husband, and of course, the child. Just so we could have the option to visit the hospital pretty much without limits, go there for whatever issues we had. And so, when I got pregnant, my insurance covered absolutely everything, yeah. That means all the tests, all the checkups, and the delivery itself. And actually, I gave birth with the same doctor who delivered my first child. Yeah. I know that, in this case, the insurance works. I know that sometimes people would come here and try to get insurance for themselves. But it really depended a lot on the insurance company they went to, because some companies would immediately refuse and say, "No, you're already pregnant."
Did this just start happening in the last 6 months or a year? Because, as far as I know, this never used to happen before. You could sign up even a month before giving birth.
Well, I don't know the details now because I've never worked with insurance. I've never offered anyone to give birth using insurance because, well, from the very beginning it was always kind of taboo here that in order to get insurance and have it cover your entire pregnancy, you shouldn't be pregnant even for a single day. Matthew. Because, well, if it turns out later, for example, that you actually got insurance when you were already pregnant, they can either fine you or just cancel your insurance altogether. There have been cases like that too. That's it. So, but at the same time, in the Telegram chat, I would occasionally see that people managed to get insurance and then came over, tried to give birth. Well, yes, apparently with some kind of fine, which they paid. That's it. But now I know that this is almost impossible to do. So almost no one is giving birth using insurance at this point.
Interesting.
And yes, of course, there's free healthcare. But accordingly, at the moment, this is in question because, yes, the decree from May 29th states that free healthcare should not be available to foreigners. But since we're currently in this kind of transitional period about this, and, well, no one really understands yet how this law will actually work, that's how it is. Emergency medical care is free, it is provided. But since there isn't a specific regulation on how this should be implemented, there isn't really an answer to this question yet either.
Interesting. Over almost 3 years of living here, I've often been asked questions about this. By the way, I don't deal with childbirth myself. But people kept asking me, someone wanted to fly here to give birth, they'd ask, what's it like here? How is it? And so on. I would say, make sure you bring a huge bag of money and then come here. And don't think you can just fly here cheaply, conveniently, give birth quickly, and fly back. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And I guess it's worth clarifying what kind of financial range you need just to come here at all. And for people to really understand how much money is needed for all of this. Not counting, of course, the tickets. Flights are a whole separate story.
If we don't count the tickets and the flight, you still need to make a distinction here, because there are people who come just to get documents for their child and then leave. There are people who stay here, they get documents for themselves, and some end up living here. And obviously, those are going to be completely different budgets. Yeah. If we're talking just about people, right? People who, for example, are only getting documents for their child, and so they usually come for about 3 months, then I think the final, the total amount they end up spending, including the apartment, food, groceries, cafes, restaurants, basically absolutely everything, is as follows. So I think that for 3 months, plus our support, that is absolutely everything, hospital, of course, doctors, all those checkups, ultrasounds, basically everything. So everything possible, everything including daily living, except for airfare, I think.
You could say maybe $12,000.
Yes, it will be somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000. Well, it depends on how much you want to keep track of your spending. So if you don't really want to pay much attention to prices, it'll be closer to 15. If you set a strict budget for yourself and you really pay attention to prices, like which milk to buy and how much it costs and so on, then I think it'll be around 12,000. But if we're talking about, naturally, a longer period of living there. Here in Argentina, for example, we're talking about things like lawyer services if people want to get citizenship or document translations. Because in order to apply for citizenship or to apply for residency for parents, you need to prepare a certain set of documents that people bring with them here. At the same time, in order for a document to be valid here, it must be translated by an official translator specifically here in Argentina, and the document has to be legalized. So if you add up all these costs as well. So yes, the lawyer, this amount for document translations, the state fees for processing residency for parents. Well, I think the total will be somewhere around, for this period, about 18, maybe $20,000.
Yes, it's absolutely individual. It all depends on how many people, probably, are coming with the family. Well, how many people? Like if someone is bringing their mom, or someone else along. And I think for more detailed information, you can reach out to Svetlana. During the consultation, she goes over the specific case of each individual.
Yes, yes. So we prepare an estimate. I mean, we outline a budget for each client depending on who is coming with them. Because obviously, if it's an older child or two older children, the budget might be a bit higher, not just because of government fees or the cost of processing documents, but also because there are many couples, for example, who come to us with older kids. That automatically brings up questions about kindergarten or hiring a nanny. Of course, that, increases the family's budget. Right. But these are very rough numbers, and it's important to understand that it doesn't mean people will actually spend that much. For example, I have a couple who spent $10,000 in 3 months, and there's another couple who spent $50,000 in the same period. So, that's roughly over the same time frame. So, it's not like this happened back in, say, 2022 or 2023, when prices here were extremely low. No, this actually happened in 2024, closer to the end of the year, 2024, when prices were already more or less comparable to what we have now.
Yeah, Argentina is the kind of country where you can really live on any budget. You can actually live here very cheaply if, well, you're able to live that way. That means choosing your stores, not just going to the first one you see. Finding ways to save money. You can generally rent an apartment here in the microcenter for about $400 to $500, as far as I know, and so on. And you can also, live somewhere. I forgot, woman, what's the name of the area?
Puerto Madero.
Puerto Madero, yes. In Puerto Madero, you can rent an apartment for $4,000 to $5,000 in some.
Well, you can take off more.
And even higher, yes, there are price tags there. And to live, that's it. But I think when it comes to finances, I'll leave Sveta's contact info in the description. By the way, this isn't a sponsored integration. This is a completely mutual thing between us.
But it could have been.
It could have been, yes. It's a completely mutual thing, because the topic of giving birth in Argentina and legalization is such a hot topic, and there are a lot of questions around it. That's why we actually decided to record this video. So, how does the support process work? What does it include? The whole process, as I understand it, from meeting at the airport all the way to childbirth. I think it would be great to tell people about the whole thing, since people are really interested in it.
Well, actually, the process doesn't start with meeting at the airport. It starts much earlier. And in general, the original idea, when we got into this, was that the support service would be a turnkey solution. In other words, the support process should cover all the needs people have when they come here. That's why we usually start working with people before they even arrive. There are basically 2 important things we do before they arrive: preparing documents, which is especially relevant if they're getting citizenship for themselves, and finding an apartment. Since, we already have a ton of experience in this area, and we even have a dedicated manager on the team who works exclusively on this, right? So, accordingly, we help people select an apartment remotely, and by the time they arrive, they already have a place reserved. When they land, of course, we meet them at the airport, and the transfer takes them straight to their apartment where they move in. After they've settled in, we meet up, basically, at our group meeting. I'm there, the guys are there, and from my side, there's also a doula who acts as an interpreter. She speaks Russian and Spanish, and she generally supports them the whole time we're working together, especially on the medical side. That's how it is. Of course, it includes choosing the clinic, selecting the doctor, and accompanying them to all their appointments. So basically, from the moment of that meeting, they never have to go anywhere alone anymore.
You really take care of them completely.
Exactly. So, to answer the question, sometimes people ask me, do you need to know Spanish, at least some basic Spanish, in order to give birth here in Argentina? And actually, if we're talking specifically about childbirth, you don't need to know Spanish here, because there will always be someone to handle communication for you. But if you do want to understand a bit about how people interact here, what they talk about, that's a different story. Because obviously, when it comes to everyday things like going to the store, a cafe, or a restaurant, it's clear that we won't be there with you. And of course, it's much more comfortable when you at least understand people a little and can order something yourself.
3 months before giving birth, you'll still have to go to appointments anyway.
Right. Yes, so we handle the entire process on the medical side. So the process is as streamlined as possible. And, yeah, our team handles things like helping you choose a doctor, helping you pick a clinic, signing a contract with the doctor, signing a contract with the clinic, and so on. Well, I guess it's important to note that, in general, when I first had the idea that we needed to formalize everything we were already doing into some kind of full-fledged support, a real company for organizing childbirth, it was really important to have some kind of guiding idea, you know? Because it's clear, obviously, that people come here to have a baby, to get the paperwork done, but I wanted,
The baby automatically gets citizenship.
yes, the baby gets it automatically. I'll talk about that in a moment too. But I wanted to do more than just, simply handle that process. And that's why I thought it would be great if a woman had some kind of support during childbirth, which is exactly what a doula can provide. Because childbirth, yes, the whole birthing process, it can really vary in length, right? If it's a second birth, it can go faster, But if it's a first birth, on average, that lasts about 10 to 14 hours, statistically speaking, that's how it usually goes.
You're saying this as a mother of two, from personal experience.
Well, my first labor actually lasted something like 26 hours. So, that's why. Yeah, but the average number is 10. And that's why I thought it was really great to have not just a translator with you during childbirth, someone who just facilitates communication, but to have someone qualified who thoroughly understands what the birthing process looks like, what exactly is happening to you in the moment, and who can provide you with certain kinds of non-medical support. Because, well, you have to understand that Argentina is a different country, it's not the CIS. And a very important point, which is probably more relevant for women, is that they only give you an epidural or really any anesthesia during labor once you're at 5 centimeters dilation. They won't give it to you any earlier. And that's why I always say it's really great that you have a doula from our side who can help you non-medically, simply because you don't have any other options.
It's amazing that I know all this information, because I follow Sveta on Instagram and keep up with everything.
Yeah, well, it goes a bit deeper if we're just talking about childbirth, the physiology of birth.
Actually, that topic is interesting too. I also heard something about natural birth or C-section here. Does the woman get to choose how she gives birth, or...
Here the woman chooses for herself. If you come in and say, I want to give birth naturally, or I want a C-section, that's what you get. If we're talking about a private hospital, even in public hospitals.
It's not like that in Russia, as far as I know. So there, natural birth is the default, and a C-section is only done if necessary, right?
Well, yes, only if there are medical indications. Well, here I can say that since our main focus is still on gentle, natural births, most of the women who come to us want to give birth naturally. And in this sense, we actually have good results on our side, meaning that 89% of the women who gave birth with us did so naturally. So, the C-sections that we have among our clients are only done for medical reasons, or if a woman specifically requests it from the start, saying that's what she wants. So, those stories where a woman is in labor for a long time and the doctor says, oh my God, you've been in labor for so long. Let's just do a C-section. That just doesn't happen at all. I've never seen that happen, not even once. Yeah, and honestly, I think that's really great. So, when there are doctors and us working together as a team, everyone is ready to wait, and if the process is going well, no one intervenes unless it's really necessary. Because, well, there's a lot of talk everywhere now about gentle births, gentle births. My God, what even is a gentle birth, right? But the fundamental and overarching principle of this entire and complex situation is that, Well, it's not precisely or exclusively about that particular aspect, but rather that a woman's inherent physiological makeup is such that her remarkable and capable body instinctively knows how to naturally and effectively give birth to a new life. And if everything is going safely for both mother and baby, there's no need to interfere in the process. So that's basically the main idea. And it's really great that the doctors we work with here fully share this approach. And I think that thanks to our work and the work of the doctors we collaborate with most closely, we're able to achieve these kinds of results.
I'm curious, how good are the surgeons here when it comes to post-cesarean care? I also know that a lot of women worry about this issue. They're concerned that the scar will be big, unattractive, and so on.
Well, first of all, if we compare how C-sections are done in the CIS countries, here the incision is made much lower and it's much shorter. And I had several clients who had their first child in the States, and it turned out to be a C-section. Then they went to have their second child here in Argentina. I actually had 2 clients like that. And both of them said that here in Argentina, the scar was done better.
That's cool, interesting. I think that's important information for a lot of women too.
Yeah, that was, unexpected, right? Kind of. But it's great that here, everything related to medicine and childbirth is at a really high level, and the doctors who work in this field are highly qualified.
Great. We're jumping from topic to topic a bit, but let's try to get back on track. After the child is born, they receive documents. But that's not the end of your support role. It's not like the girl gave birth and that's it, goodbye.
Right. So, basically, we're there, yes, up until the guys arrive. Then, when they arrive, yes, if we paint with broad strokes, everything related to the medical part, we provide support, including during childbirth and what happens after. There is a certain amount of postpartum support. This usually includes several appointments. The child sees a neonatologist, a pediatrician, and the doctor who delivered the baby, and, accordingly, the mother also has a checkup. That's what concerns, so to speak, the strictly medical part. After that, meaning from the moment of discharge, the process of processing documents begins, either just for the child or for both the child and, accordingly, the parents. If we're talking about documents for the child, then basically the child receives 3 documents. These are the birth certificate, and then here it's called DNI, which is a national document, kind of like an internal passport for children.
ID.
Yeah, that's right. The third document is the international passport. So, these 3 documents, a translator gets involved, handling paperwork and accompanying you throughout the process. That's it. Basically, they take care of all the appointments and just bring people to the right place at the right time.
That's regarding the child. So basically, the child is born already fully equipped with all the necessary documents. But what do the parents get in return?
Yes, so the child automatically becomes a citizen by right of birth? Yes, because in Argentina, the law of just solely applies. That means anyone born here automatically becomes a citizen of this country. So the process of getting documents for the child is more of a technicality, really. If we're talking about the timeline again, it usually takes about 3 weeks on average to get all the documents for the child sorted out. And I feel like in Argentina, basically, I think you can get the fastest passport here compared to other countries. Because there's an option to have your passport printed right at the airport in just 2 to 4 hours.
Basically, after this stage, you can start packing your things and leave for wherever you want.
Yeah, if you don't want to get the documents for yourself, if you don't plan to, then people just pack up and, naturally, leave.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting thing, because basically, the parents of that child can come back to Argentina at any time and get the documents whenever they want. So it's not like you have to stay here after giving birth, live here, and so on. So basically, it's absolutely not required, and at any time the parent of the child can come back and, take care of it.
Yeah, so that right stays with them. This basis is called family reunification. So there's no such thing as a birth basis, like people often say.
A birth basis.
Yeah, like people often write that in Telegram. So there is such a basis. It's family reunification. When you reunite, with your Argentine child, and then, yes, you can get a residence permit and, accordingly, later on, citizenship.
All right. If the parents do decide to stay and take care of the paperwork, there are a lot of questions and debates about this right now, too. Tell us briefly, too, what updates we have now, what our new favorite president has rolled out here for extranjeros, basically, for foreigners.
Well, it's really hard right now to give any reliable information.
Yeah, but we do have information as of July 10th, actually. Most likely, in a month, either in mid or early August, this information will change, and they'll probably update it. But at the moment,
So, up until May 29th, right, when the new decree came out that changed the immigration law in certain aspects, up until May 29th. Basically, parents, that is, on the basis of family reunification, meaning parents of an Argentine citizen and people who married an Argentine citizen, they could apply for citizenship right away. Right away means that as soon as the child was born, in principle, the parents could immediately apply for their Argentine citizenship. And then, yes, there was a certain process. It took about a year and a half, during which they would receive and process this citizenship. And the same applied to marriage. On May 29th, a decree was issued stating that this no longer works that way, not just for parents specifically, but now, in general, everyone must live in Argentina for 2 years, and only after that can they apply for citizenship. That's it. At the same time, there was a lot of noise and confusion about this overall.
and there still is.
And still, yeah, in reality, we don't know how this decree will actually work, because the decree was issued, but there aren't any specific regulations yet about how the whole procedure will be organized now. There just aren't any. That's it. So the only thing we can say at this point is that there just isn't any reliable information yet about what the conditions will be and what the process of applying for citizenship will look like now. So basically, we have these 2 years, and we have the work of lawyers who aren't really in agreement, right? That's pretty much how it is overall. Well, for many people, right? There's a lot of noise around this decree again. That's it. So here, well, the only thing I would suggest, yes, it seems to me that in order to specifically talk about how people will now be able to obtain citizenship, not just parents, but in general, people living here in Argentina, we need a bit of time to see what kinds of cases will come up, right, on the one hand. And in general, what will happen with the decree, right? Because there's a second point of view that the decree has to go through Congress, through Parliament, and it still hasn't passed through them yet, so.
As far as I understand, all of this will be happening in August, and we'll see what comes of it. But purely from my point of view, I think the law is quite reasonable, and living for 2 years to get a passport is absolutely normal. And actually, it was more or less the same before. They basically just amended it. I mean, they made some changes and so on, and I think they'll still keep the 2-year requirement in the law. The only thing is, they'll tweak it and so on. Because right now, you basically have to stay in the country for 2 years without leaving. And having to stay here for 2 years without leaving is, of course, absolutely against all human rights, norms, and so on. Because different situations can happen. Most likely, in August, maybe in September, they'll already make some amendments. And well, I think again, if you subscribe to Svetlana, you'll be able to know all these things in more detail over time.
Yeah, that's right. So the main difficulty is that for now, there is a decree, yes, and importantly, this isn't a law, it's a decree, but we still don't understand how it's going to work.
As far as I know, if all the documents are in order and a good package was prepared in Russia, which you, in fact, inform the person coming here to give birth about in advance, then usually there are no problems or difficulties. The only issues that can happen here are probably the local bureaucracy and the timelines, because they're completely different for everyone. Maybe you could briefly tell us about the courts, about this luck you mentioned?
Well, if we're talking now about documents for the parents, right? Because I've already talked about the timeline for processing the child's documents. Uh, so there's this DNI that the parents receive. Uh, from the moment the parents go to the immigration office and physically submit all their documents, they receive a document that allows them to legally stay in Argentina until their residency is approved. Right? So, residency is basically this plastic DNI card. Uh, the official processing time is 3 months, right? So, basically, within 3 months, in theory, yeah, you should get the approval. And you do get it if it's, well, a standard set of documents, right? At the same time, you have to understand that this is just the official time frame. So there are cases when people get approved in 3 weeks, in a month and a half, 2 months, 3 months, even 3.5 sometimes. Yeah, that happens. Yeah, but overall, these are the approximate time frames you can expect. If we're talking about citizenship, for example, obviously the time frame is longer because the process of obtaining citizenship goes, well, at least for now, before the new decree, the process goes through the courts, right? So, in Argentina, there are 11 courts. Each person's case is randomly assigned to one of these courts, and that specific court reviews your case. Yeah. I think the average time frame is about a year and a half, roughly from a year to a year and a half.
So, probably from 9 to 15 months.
Right. At the same time, there are cases that are shorter, right? I mean, there are people who got citizenship in 6 months. For example, I have a friend who got her citizenship in 5.5 months, right? So it really depends on a number of factors, on the court that, your case ends up in, on whether you're handling the case with a lawyer or not, because with a lawyer, obviously, it'll go faster.
Yeah, and here you also shouldn't confuse lawyers and legal consultants. Those are completely different things. And people often end up dealing with legal consultants who, basically, don't have a lawyer's license.
Yeah. Or maybe not even legal consultants, but, well, there's a lawyer with a law license, and
There's a helper.
right. And, yeah. So if we, well, basically, yeah, say that someone files with a lawyer, then it might be faster than filing on your own. And what does that depend on? Oh, and living in the country. That depends, in the sense that if a person is living in the country the whole time while their case is ongoing, naturally, they can respond to court requests more quickly, right? Because if, say, the court issues a request, I don't know, like, go and give your fingerprints. So the person goes the next day, gives their fingerprints, and their case moves forward. Obviously, if people are coming and going, I see this on Telegram now, like, I spent 2 years getting citizenship, or 2.5. But then, when the person starts describing their case in more detail, you realize that they left the country, for example, right? Or out of those 2.5 years, they just weren't in the country for 10 months. Right. So here, I think, well, it's not really correct to, rely on these kinds of stories. Like, someone told me it was 2 years, someone else said 3, and here it's 6 months. Because when you don't understand what kind of case it is, or what really happened there, it's the same as with childbirth. People often tell me their delivery experiences varied. But I can't say anything, because I wasn't at those births. I don't know how the labor process. So I think it's the same here.
Yeah, this is a good point to move on to the next topic: how childbirth in Argentina differs from childbirth in the CIS. But I want to clarify a bit that the timelines we've been talking about for the last 5 minutes are no longer relevant, because the laws are changing. And now, getting a passport in 9 or 15 months is most likely not going to work, because the rules have changed, and you need to keep an eye on that. That's that. So, moving on to the next topic. How is giving birth in Argentina different from giving birth in Russia? That's an interesting topic. And can you say something about it, considering you gave birth to both of your children here?
Well, it really depends on which criteria we're looking at. So, if we're talking about giving birth in a private clinic, say in Russia, I don't think the price would be all that different now. Yeah, if we're not talking about the whole trip, but just focusing on the delivery itself, then giving birth in Russia, for example, and here, I don't think the prices are going to be that different. Yeah, and like I mentioned before, here they only give an epidural once you're at 5 centimeters. Why is that? Because there are studies showing that if you get an epidural before 5 centimeters, the labor process can stop or slow down. So, yeah, that's why they don't give it earlier here. In Russia, they'll give it to you earlier, at 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, basically whenever you ask for it. Yeah. So, yeah, that's one of the differences you might see. We've already talked about C-sections, right? That they're done based on medical indications. Well, again, maybe now in some hospitals or clinics they do them just because. But, yeah, it used to always be only for medical reasons. Yeah, here, on the other hand, you can basically do it if you want to. I think probably the main difference is that here, the attitude of doctors, midwives, really all the medical staff towards women is very friendly and welcoming. Basically, they just adore pregnant women here. They love babies, they love kids, and so in a medical facility, no one will ever say anything rude to you, no one will ever belittle you or anything like that, nothing at all. They are as open and friendly as possible, and they just radiate and share this all-encompassing love with you. I'm not saying that this doesn't exist in CIS countries. I think it does exist somewhere. But if we're talking about statistics and the overall culture, then here it's really embedded in their culture. Plus, there's a law here that actually regulates the relationship between medical staff. Yes, a law about childbirth that regulates how medical staff should treat women. And of course, that also plays a role. Yeah, so,
Here, in general, women are treated with a lot of care, and there are tons of laws that protect them and so on. It's really widespread here. Probably the main difference between giving birth in Russia and in Argentina is that, well, in Russia or any CIS country, here your child will get a passport and will have the opportunity to travel, if I'm not mistaken, to 196 countries, right?
174.
174. Well, yeah, 196 is Spain and Japan, I think, right? Well, in any case, it's a lot. So basically, it's an open world, opportunities, and so on. By the way, do you help with getting a Russian passport for the child? If, for example, someone is from Russia?
Well, we explain how to do it, right? Because a lot of people, well, don't try to get citizenship for their child here. Usually, they go back to their own country and handle it there, you know.
Because you might have to wait 4 or 5 months just to get an appointment at the consulate, and sometimes you never get one at all. Although with this new consular right,
Yeah, there is.
you can speed it up.
No, you can do it there. It's actually pretty fast. Well, basically, it all depends on each specific case. If people need some support or assistance, we can help. That's it. But in most cases, at least in my experience, people end up applying for citizenship after they've already returned to their home country, because it seems to be much faster and easier to do it there than here.
All right. Tell me, what advice would you give? I guess you regularly give this advice to your clients, to women who want to come here and give birth.
Well, if we're talking about advice, so if the person who contacts us for support and we start working with them before they arrive, then honestly, there aren't that many tips, mostly just about preparing directly for the flight. That's what I give advice on. Yeah, we discuss a lot about what to buy, what not to buy, and so on. Because, basically, we're responsible for this whole process. And, well, people really don't have to do anything themselves, right? So to speak, roughly, if we're talking about someone wanting to handle this on their own, if people want to take care of this themselves, then of course, you really need to set aside enough time specifically for preparing for the trip. I really strongly recommend taking care of all the documents in advance. Seriously, because there can be all sorts of cases, right? Of course, there's a standard set of documents and it's publicly available. Like, you can just find it online, the documents people always need to bring with them. But sometimes there are special cases, and it's important to figure those out ahead of time. So, are you following the standard set of documents? Or are you, let's say, a special case and need additional paperwork? And as for finding an apartment, I also really recommend looking into how the real estate market works in Argentina well in advance, because it's different. Then you just need to accept that at some point, just come to terms with it.
Most people start out renting through Airbnb for a week or so.
If you have the opportunity, if you have a foreign car and you can pay, then
I forget that not everyone has that option.
yeah. So, when it comes to finding an apartment, I can say that it's honestly one of the hardest parts of the whole trip to Argentina. And that's why it's very important to figure it out in advance. If you're, yes, preparing for a trip on your own, to figure it out in advance. The areas, the prices, what level of apartments they are, and so on and so forth. As for the language,
I also want to say a little about the apartment. AAA. A large number of people, unfortunately, stumble over such a story. Me too, when I came here almost 3 years ago. Here, there's such a thing as a 20% agent's commission. There's also the concept of a deposit for the last month and
not for the last month, it's just a deposit.
it's just a deposit, yes. There are also some who ask for the last month, and there are hosts who only rent if you pay 3 or 6 months in advance. So when I personally came here, I paid for the apartment 6 months in advance. I paid a 20% deposit, and I also paid a commission to a Russian helper. And it was a lot, honestly. I shelled out quite a stack of cash. Now I'm renting an apartment with just a deposit, no commissions, paying month to month, and so on. And if you're not familiar with the country, 80% of the listings will be exactly that kind of setup, as you'd expect. That means a 20% commission, a deposit, a helper's fee, and so on. And honestly, that's pretty normal. But there are other options, I think.
There's also this concept in Argentina called a guarantee, where you have to show that you have guarantees, meaning that you are,
Solvent.
financially solvent. This guarantee, it's only issued within Argentina, and basically, an Argentine who already owns property can give it to you, sort of vouching for you, saying that you're financially reliable. There are a lot of apartments, so, for example, what I used to run into when I was only working in real estate is that people would sometimes send me listings from Argentine sites asking, hey, could you please check if this apartment is available or not? You start to look into it or just read the listing, and you see that one of the requirements is a guarantor. So, people who come here as tourists don't have the ability to provide a guarantor, and that's why there are some apartments, often really nice ones, with lower prices than tourist rentals, but unfortunately, they're not available to them. So, you need to understand right away that some listings will be unavailable to tourists, because there's no way to provide this guarantor, and even offering a double deposit or paying in advance doesn't solve the problem. There are landlords who only want this guarantor, and nothing else will do. You can pay month to month. I don't care at all, but I just want you to have a guarantor. So, in addition to what you just mentioned, there's also this situation.
There are also landlords who can easily not return your deposit. And unfortunately, people do run into this, and I've experienced it myself too. But here, it's probably best to work with good realtors and reliable apartment or property owners. And then you won't have any problems. If you're searching for apartments or rentals on your own, you could definitely run into a million problems here. And I guess the final thing is that what scares people the most is this idea that Argentina is super unsafe, that you can't even go outside and it's dangerous. Well, that's probably the most common myth. And personally, I think Argentina is probably the safest country in Latin America, Because here, well, it's calm. If you live in good neighborhoods, and there are a lot of them here, like Palermo, Recoleta, even Retiro is relatively safe, then you won't have any problems. Well, I don't know. Well, not counting Belgrano. I mean all these neighborhoods. You can easily consider them and feel comfortable there.
But there's something to say here, because Argentina ranks first in the safety index. Based on research and statistics, right now, Argentina holds the top spot among all Latin American countries. Uruguay is in second place. Until recently, it was the other way around. That is, Uruguay used to be considered the safest country and held the top spot. Now they've switched places, so now Argentina is in first place. And if we talk about all countries, Argentina ranks 47th among all countries in Latin, among all countries in the world, actually. That's actually quite a high ranking, to be honest. So, basically, you can either leave a link or just, actually look up these statistics yourself.
Or just take our word for it.
So, really, well, I know that in 2022 to 2023 it wasn't like that. So, specifically in 2024 and 2025, Argentina really climbed a lot in the safety rankings and,
Because it became unsafe for your wallet, and a lot of people left.
So, just for comparison, for example, this safety index in Argentina is 1,755, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, 1,755. For comparison, in Brazil, this same indicator is almost 3,000, like 2,900 or so.
Yeah, in Chile it's just.
So, you can hear a lot of stories, about how it's unsafe in Argentina, and in Uruguay it's also unsafe, and in Chile it's unsafe, and in Brazil it's unsafe. Because, obviously, all of us are going to have very different experiences. Or you can just look at the statistics and see what the situation is like here, right? But again, if we're talking about things like theft and so on, of course those things happen in Argentina too. I can say that, well, when it comes to the capital, you just need to be careful in any capital city of any country and not wave your phone around like this. That way, you can avoid unpleasant situations. And speaking of my personal experience, I've had 3 situations here where my things were returned to me. Twice, my phone was returned to me. The first time was actually a long time ago. I think it was right after my daughter was born. I left my phone at the Recoleta cemetery. It's a super touristy place, and my phone was returned. Yeah. I only realized it was missing 2 hours later. They texted my phone, and this guy answered, saying, "Yeah, I'm at a bar, come by and I'll give you your phone." The second time, I was running across a crosswalk and my phone fell out. A guy ran after me. "Excuse me, did you drop this?"
You won't believe it. I had the exact same thing happen to me today on my way to this shoot. Except it wasn't my phone. It was my tripod that fell out, and I was in a hurry. And this guy just ran after me and brought it back. I was like, no way.
And the third time, I just left my backpack hanging on the back of a chair at a cafe, and we just left. That's it. We'd already been walking around for 30 or 40 minutes, and I was just horrified. My husband asks me, "Where's your backpack?" And I'm like, "Oh crap." So, basically, I just ran back to the cafe, and they just gave me my backpack back, saying, "Yeah, we saw that you just left it here." So I think the question is, what kind of person is it who finds your stuff? That's it.
Yeah. I'll add a bit of a downer too, so to speak. Probably about 2 years ago, it was really common in all the news, public groups, and Telegram channels. Someone had their phone stolen. Someone had something snatched. Personally, my friends have had 4 phones stolen. Well, I do have a lot of friends here. I don't know, at least 80 people I know for sure, maybe even more. But just 4 phones, as far as I remember, have been swiped. There were a lot of cases where people would smash car windows at a traffic light and, for example, grab a bag or something like that. But that was probably about 2 years ago.
Yeah, but that's also a question of the neighborhood. In which neighborhood did this happen exactly? Because if we're still talking about the neighborhoods you mentioned, then it's not about all of Argentina, right? Because it's not all over Buenos Aires, since obviously Buenos Aires isn't just made up of those neighborhoods, right?
Most often, it's probably the microcenter, which is more or less where we are right now. These are the kinds of areas that are unsafe, or at least less safe. For example, in Palermo, in Núñez, in Belgrano, and so on, I probably
In Recommended 2, you really don't see that.
haven't even heard of such cases, probably. So yeah, everything that has to do with the center, the microcenter as they call it, basically this whole area, yeah, it happens here more often. I think it's only here that I've heard of it happening. That's it. But if you live somewhere in Palermo, Recoleta, Belgrano, or Núñez, I don't think you'll run into that kind of thing. That's it. And actually, I have a final question here, though I pretty much already heard the answer at the beginning. If you had to choose where to give birth again, would you still choose to have your baby here or not? I mean, since you had your second child here, the answer seems obvious. But maybe if you decide to go for a third, would anything change or not? Or would you still choose Argentina?
Well, my answer is that, I like Argentina. Obviously, there's no such thing as a perfect country to live in, and everywhere has its own quirks and issues. The question, in my opinion, is when you're choosing a country to live in, which factors are critical for you? And so, if you do have those, because, I'll say it again, every country has its downsides. If, for you, the advantages of that country outweigh its drawbacks, then you choose that place as your home. That's it. So, yes, to answer the question, if I had to do it all over again, if I were to have a child again, both the first and the second, I would give birth in Argentina. That's it. Because for me, the advantages that this country has and the opportunities it gives to people who are born here and to the parents of children born here, for me, and in general, just the country itself, what it has, how everything is set up here, I don't know. So for me, there are a number of aspects, a number of criteria that outweigh the drawbacks that exist here in Argentina. That's why, yes, if I were to have another child, I would have the baby here.
Rim, we'll wrap up here. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me.
It was a pleasant and interesting experience.
Likewise.
That's it. See you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Oh, that's all. I sincerely hope that the second part of this recording was captured clearly and accurately as well.